So this $700 music player is a FiiO M11 Plus. Now the thing is, I get a lot of people on my channel who, everyone from people who are just randomly cruising YouTube and wondering what the heck is this thing you're talking about, through to people who already know about these players and all the fine details that I'm about to talk about in the video. So I'm going to try and cover everything. So if you just stumbled across this video, well, probably the main question is, why would I pay $700 for a music player when maybe your phone already has, you maybe already have Bluetooth headphones, or you might already, have some, maybe you're using the dongle out of your iPhone and you plug into some cheap in-ear monitors or something like that. Or you may even have something like a fairly decent dongle DAC like this Luxury and Precision, and you're wondering, why would I pay, more money for something like this? So let's talk about what this thing is. Well, it's basically an Android-based music player. So it's kind of like having, well, more or less like having instead of having a phone to play back, which, your phone may have some kind of audio playback facilities in there, this has more dedicated audio playback. Like, it has quite different headphone ports, for example. So it may not be that, you might have some Bluetooth earphones. I have my own, AirPods Pro here, or I have some other brands of other stuff here. And, you might just use those with your phone, and that's fine. But what if you want better sound quality than is delivered by, your little cheap dongle or your Bluetooth headphones? Because, those things, when you're transmitting over Bluetooth especially, you're losing some sound quality. They actually have to compress the music and cut out a lot of the fine sounds out there to be able to transmit it through to, the earphones. And then there's maybe you have noise cancelling and a bunch of electronic processing going on there, and that, again, you lose some sound quality through there. So you may have some really good music you like listening to, like I do. I have some really high quality recordings, and it's really nice to be able to hear like the fine details of how the singer sings, or the musicians play their instruments. Some of the fine detail that you get in those really great recordings, you just don't get it all, say with Bluetooth headphones, or out of these little dongle DACs and that. And that's why people spend more money, in this case $700, or sometimes even over $1,000 or even over $2,000 for a really good playback system. Now, you may do that on the desktop, or you may want something you take with you, especially in places like, say, Hong Kong and Singapore, where this kind of thing is all the rage. So you also, if we give an example, some high quality in-ear monitors are from the same company, FiiO. I have these FH9 hybrid in-ear monitors, and they have not just, like a couple of little, balanced armatures or something like that, but it actually has a bunch of drivers in there, dynamic drivers, and six balanced armature drivers. So really sophisticated pair of in-ear monitors, and you can power them out of something like this little dongle. It'll work, but it doesn't sound as good as if you have, a dedicated device with really good audio componentry inside. So how does this FiiO M11 Plus work at being better than something like this little dongle DAC? Well, let's take a look at all the features that it has. Now, it's an Android 10 based device, and one of the things they do is, it doesn't have Android 11. You might wonder, why would I bother then? Is that they customize the system so that it will have bit perfect output. That is, the quality of the audio track in there, the digital audio track, whether you're streaming it or you have it on a micro SD card, the quality of that will be sent out exactly as it should to the audio components, which are in here. Or if you do, say, plug in something to the USB-C to another device, I have a few things floating around here. For example, you might want to use it to another high-end device such as this Cord Mojo, then it will have bit perfect output here. Now, if you don't have bit perfect output, then it will alter the digital audio, and you'll lose some sound quality. So kind of you're avoiding alteration of the digital audio. That's really critical in these components. But speaking of that, you do have some, if you are using it direct, say with a pair of in-ear monitors like these FH9s, well, you do have a couple of interesting options for output. Now, you have your standard 3.5mm jack, which is universal on everything. But you also have a couple of other options which are balanced outputs. Now, there are a couple of different sizes because there have been a couple of different standards appear, but the latest is called a 4.4mm Pentacon. Here's a tip: if you're a experienced user and you've used this already, it's actually derived from a Pro Audio jack, which has 3 connectors, not 5. Bet you didn't know that, but it's not something you know unless you're into Pro Audio. I didn't know it at all. But anyway, it's designed to be a more reliable jack than this tiny 2.5mm jack, which Astell and Kern was when they started using it, the only plugs were available were the fairly garbage and caused all sorts of issues. It's bigger, chunkier, bulkier, but, well, it does the job better. It also means that this output can be used as a dedicated line out to, say, another amplifier because it has the all-important ground connection, which is important not for headphones or in-ear monitors, but for line-level connections. But anyway, you have your usual USB-C jack, which can be audio in or audio out if you want to use this as a digital device, which I'll talk about in a bit. Let's get it out of its case because it's got some funky features. It comes with a decent leather case too, as you probably already realized. Well, in terms of design, because it's an audio device, it has some buttons and things which make it, well, ideal for that. On the side, you have these, well, hexagonal, I think, which gives a bit of a, as I say, a bit of a gamer vibe, which I think actually is pretty cool. These hexagonal buttons for your playback, one with the little knob in the middle so you can actually feel if you're trying to fiddle around and, find the button in your pocket. It also has, well, the hold button, which we'll talk about later, so you can disable some of the buttons as required if you don't want it accidentally being pressed. It can take up to a 1 terabyte micro SD card. Well, I think it could take up to 2 terabytes, but there's only 1 terabyte available at the moment. Do note there are a lot of fake ones out there. If they're cheap and too big to be true, if you're not paying for a $100 and something SanDisk, well, or PNY or Samsung or the like, then you're basically buying a fake card. There's a link in the description to another video where I talk about that. But anyhow, you have a power button, and check out the funky glow there, and you have a custom button which you can actually program with a number of features, and I'll show that a bit later in the software. The cool thing is, let me just turn the hold button off, is you have this funky touch volume control. So as you touch it, there are a few features you can program in here. You can press to change the volume, and this is just a regular button, or you can set it to be able to touch and slide, which I think is a pretty neat feature. And you can disable all of this as required if you think it's going to be a bit of an irritation. Actually, speaking of that, let's take a look at what it can do. Inside, you see I've already got it running. It's just regular Android 10, and I've already installed a couple of music apps in there. I've got Apple Music, Radio Paradise, which is a really cool radio station that streams lossless, and USB Audio Player Pro, which people who are into the hobby will know about already. But it comes mainly with the FiiO Player app. Now, if you're not familiar with this, you can download it on Android onto your phone with iPhone and check it out. It has a number of different features. I'm not going to go into super detail about what it can do. It's obviously in this case optimized for the FiiO players, but you can check out most of the features on your phone. And it has a few things that maybe things like Apple Music don't do so well. I think the layout of it is a little bit better. If you're using what's called a DLNA server, kind of the DLNA system to stream music, across your internal network, you can actually pick up media servers, and I've got a couple of things that support DLNA, which I use. And it means that you can actually network stream across your internal network, and that's something you can't easily do on Apple Music. You just have to use their sync system, for example. But rather than go into details about that, you can explore that app, and most of the features are available on the regular kind of App Store versions. So kind of the settings gives away a lot of what's possible in here. Most of it's regular Android 10, but let me just cover the specialist stuff. One of the cool things FiiO does is have a mode chooser. Now, at the moment, it's in Android mode, which is your regular Android. But you can run it so that it just uses FiiO Music. So when you power it up, it goes straight into FiiO Music, and that's pure music mode. Now, the idea of that is maybe you just want to use the FiiO Music app, but the other thing is, because it's not running all the other crap in the background on Android, potentially the electronics are generating less noise, and that potentially could increase the sound quality a bit. And that's something some people seem to pick up on and notice, and some people don't. It's one of those things that's kind of, I call it the audio rabbit hole, which, yeah, anyway. But the other cool thing you can do is, let's say you want to use this as just a digital to analog converter. So you plug it in from your computer to the USB, and you want it to use it as a DAC, or digital to analog converter, without all the software, where you can just do that as well. Likewise, you can do the same Bluetooth and AirPlay, basically the same thing, but over Bluetooth and Wi-Fi respectively, if you just want to use this as a converter and then output audio here. So that's really cool in that you can do that. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are fairly straightforward, and one of the other options in here is that the audio options are different, and this is stuff you won't find in your regular phone. Now, the outputs at the bottom for your headphones can be selected as, in the case of the 3.5, headphone output or line output, which means it bypasses some of the circuitry and uses a direct out from the DAC, digital to analog converters, for higher quality output if you're plugging it into another amplifier. SPDIF, if you want to use this as a digital transport, it has a special adapter plug, which uses a special connector to an RCA output if you want to use it to another digital to analog converter, say a higher quality one. For example, I've got a Chord Hugo 2 here. Just ignore the 2Go, which already does that job. And yeah, some people just use these DAPs as a digital transport to other stuff. So now the 4.4 doesn't have SPDIF, but the same options available, and that's why you have that funky 5-pole plug. So if you get an adapter cable, you can use it as a balanced output to something, say, of your choice. And you can also do a cool thing, is it has an option to have adjustable volume at line out, so that you can actually change the volume, have it like act as a preamp if necessary, if so desired. Now, if you are doing SPDIF and you're using DSD, this setting will make sense to you. If not, don't worry about it. One of the other things you can do, you have your 3 gain modes in here, which are fairly self-explanatory, and some of these settings you can just pull down the slider and adjust as necessary. Most of them are already in the slider if you want to access them quickly. Low pass filter mode, the digital filter type, the inbuilt digital to analog converter has these. And some people notice a difference when selecting them, some people don't. It's one of those audio rabbit hole things again that I don't want to go into too much detail because I just want to go over the main features. Now, you can also optimize the wireless playback quality as required. For example, LDAC has kind of 4 levels. You might want to try the highest one, but if you're suddenly getting dropouts with your wireless headphones, you might want to try the others. That's assuming that you're using wireless headphones with it, which some people do. And, the others are available in kind of rough order of sound quality. For people with, of course, hearing imbalance, you can adjust the balance by default, and a lot of people do have that problem. One of the other weird features is all to DSD, and if you don't know what DSD is, it's one of those things that don't bother worrying about it. If you want to try and have this convert all music to DSD before playback, you can have it do that, although it will drain the battery considerably. And whether it's an actual benefit or not is kind of subjective. It tends to make everything sound a touch softer, but it's generally technically less accurate, but up to you. And, well, that's kind of it for the audio. Some of the other cool things which you can do with this, the display is fairly straightforward, but you can actually, this little indicator light on the side here, you can actually select whether it is brightness, whether it's constantly on, pulsing, or off, and when it's charging, whether it's constantly on, pulsing, or off as your preference. And that's kind of handy because it doesn't look so bright now, but at night time, for example, it's going to maybe feel like it's lighting up the room. And so you can adjust that, and the brightness is required. Most of the other stuff, again, is default Android, so we don't really need to care about that. Now, this global thing is where we get some other cool stuff which you don't normally see on a phone. Most of the things are fairly straightforward. The multifunction button is one we hadn't seen before. This button, you can actually select which option you have. And I'll let you go through the options there. You can pause the video and check them out. But you can actually, some of these only work with a FiiO music player, but it's kind of handy if so I'm using it as an alternate power button because, I get confused between my left and my right. But at the moment, you can select any of these features here. I wish there were more than that. One of the irritating things is that, say, the switch filter option is it doesn't show any indication on screen about what you've switched to. And I mean, I wanted to use it to kind of switch between the filters to see if I could notice a difference. But yeah, they haven't quite implemented it quite as perfectly as they might. Now, one of the other cool things that they have, of course, as we've already seen, is this cool volume touch panel. You can actually control how it works. So, for example, the touch panel, you can have sounds, which you can kind of hear them. See if I can bring it up to the mic. And whether that's on or off. And again, whether you have that slide and hold option there for adjustment. Auto lock after inactivity. I've never tested that to find out. I guess it stops it working if you don't use it for a while. And you can just disable it altogether, because this also, you can press the button to adjust the volume anyway. Now, the volume settings, you of course have max system volume if you want to, using it with a child, or using it with very sensitive in-ear monitors and don't want to have any accidents. The touch panel can be separately adjusted, which is really cool because you might want to not accidentally kind of blow your ears out. And also the power up default volume is really handy, especially if, like me switching between devices. I don't use this every day and I don't remember what the volume was set at, and I don't want to have it accidentally at 100 and blow my ears out when I plug in sensitive in-ear monitors. As well as that, you might not want to have all the buttons kind of operative when you have the thing in your pocket or whatever. So the hold switch, which we saw on the side here, which will lock some of these features, you can actually select what they lock. Now, it's not going to show too clearly here because it's really dark. Actually, the funny thing, if I put this in dark mode, you can't even read the text really clearly. But you can essentially turn on and off which buttons you want available during hold mode. But other than that, double tap to wake up if you want to be able to double tap the screen to wake up and not just press the power button. And now auto-rotate screen is a bit of a lie. It just does that. It doesn't auto-rotate anything, it just rotates the screen manually. And it's in there too, so you can rotate the screen as desired. But if you're one of those people who is really irritated by the fact that the headphone sockets are on the bottom and not the top, then you can actually just fix that with this setting. Although it does kind of change the position of all the buttons, well, what can you do? It's kind of regrettable. One of FiiO's older players, and I forget which one, actually you could actually reverse which buttons were the volume and which volume buttons and playback buttons could be inverted. And well, yeah, anyway. Other than that, the rest is standard Android. So there's nothing particular to see here. We'll just go quickly into the About device. One of the cool features, of course, the DAC is an ESS Tech 90688 x2, and we have a dual THX amplifier, AAA78, and of course 2 of them because they're not balanced by default. And of course, the big deal, of course, if you're not familiar with this, is the THX amps are supposed to have ultra-low distortion and all that. But it's kind of not as simple as saying, just measurement numbers, because when you start plugging stuff in, that's when things get interesting, which I'll talk about shortly. And it's only an old Snapdragon 660. Now, if you're wondering why don't they have newer hardware, well, essentially, it's like I asked why don't they have cameras on these, because it'd be very handy to have a camera on one of these things for various reasons I won't get into. But the reason is the manufacturers of stuff like, say, phone cameras and all that, they will not sell to companies that aren't going to buy like 1 million units. And this FiiO is just tiny compared to a phone manufacturer. It's not like Oppo, who could easily design one of these things in their sleep. It's just not going to. They have to get what hardware is available to them, and the kind of stuff that's available is not particularly fancy. And the Snapdragon 660 is probably the latest you're going to get. And unless you're Samsung or someone, you're just not going to have a chance. They're just literally the companies that make a lot of the parts for this stuff will not even talk to companies like FiiO. They just won't even. Not even interested. It's just not worth their while, because they're used to dealing with companies that again sell millions of parts. But you can check out all the other features in there. RAM 4 gig, internal storage 64 gigabytes. I think you have 58 gigabytes available from the start. I forget. We're on build number 102. So if you're watching this video and the current build number is say bigger than that, it may have some other features which I haven't mentioned in here. Now, in terms of just basic kind of performance, the Snapdragon 660, of course, is not particularly special these days, but it's enough to run YouTube pretty fine. And I watched, some stuff on YouTube recently. I was watching NPR Tiny Desk concerts, actually, because, they're actually really good. And, you can run it and you can turn it sideways and run stuff full screen, no problem. And, it'll work and you don't get any delays. I've heard of a few people complaining that with some other players that they get kind of delay between the sound and the video. I didn't have any problems with that. Again, it's not a device that you're going to multitask on and play games like you are a phone. You're primarily going to play music on it. So if you're going to install like dozens of apps and treat it like your phone and try and do work on it and watch videos and play back music and all at the same time, it's not really ideal for that. I mean, you kind of could, but it's going to be slower than a phone for doing that. It's designed, again, the aim is to play back music, and most of the functionality that's in there is for that purpose. Now, it has a Google Play Store in there, but some of the music apps, say like Qobuz, will not show up as being compatible with this. So when you search for, say, Qobuz, it just won't show up in the Play Store, and so you have to sideload some apps. So if I installed APK Pure, for example, some people may not like that, and it's full of advertising. But I mean, it sideloaded the apps that would not install. If you use your favorite sideloading system, whether it be manual or whatever, and sideload some of the player apps that will not kind of show up on the Play Store because they're not listed as being compatible. But stuff like Qobuz and whatever and Spotify and all that work fine. It's just, they're just not listed as being... It's just that they say Qobuz probably doesn't even know this device exists. So it's not going to be particularly aiming for, stuff that's, older with older hardware. They haven't tested it, haven't optimized it, and so it's just not going to show up in the Play Store at all, even though it may work perfectly fine on the player itself. So, performance, and well, I've got some fancy stuff in the screen here. We have, for example, I tried this with kind of full-sized headphones, and this is, of course, a kind of bit of overkill here. We have some Merze Lyric headphones, which are $2,000. you know, it's way more expensive than the actual player itself. But we have the nice FiiO FH9s here. I did use a variety of in-ear monitors and headphones with this. There's only just so much I can fit on screen. So the main thing is, where do we start? Like, if you've never used one of these things before, well, you know, there's you know, who do I address this to? Or if you're someone who's been around the block kind of thing and knows what performance you can get out of stuff, you kind of want to know where it stands. So in that, I'll compare it to some, you know, its main competitors, such as this R6 2020. And well, for a start, I mean, basically, it's better than one of these little dongles, for example. So to cut a long story short, what happens with, say, you know, phones and the like is they have a chip in there which does all the audio stuff. So it does the digital to analog conversion. It has the small, you know, headphone amplifier built in there of some kind, just like this dongle does, which does both of those as well. And it will, you know, it's basically enough without draining the phone's battery considerably by playing back music, because people will complain about everything, and they'll complain if their battery suddenly goes flat just because they listen to some music. So their kind of power output and the sound quality tends to be fairly limited. Now, there's some manufacturers like LG have done better than that, and they've tried to improve the sound quality and blah, 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 blah. So I don't have experience with those LG phones, for example, so I can't tell you how good the sound quality is going to be versus those. I can only tell you versus the stuff I've tried. So it's definitely a step up from something like this Apple dongle. I mean, for example, now with basic, cheap in-ear monitors and that, it's not going to make a difference, really. But when you start getting into the nice stuff like these FH9s, well, the main thing is these FH9s have big drivers in them in some cases, big dynamic drivers. I mean, okay, it was this big, yeah, okay, don't say it, don't say it. But for a little in-ear monitor, something that's this big is huge. So, you know, they have a lot of drivers in there, and kind of the driving ability of something like this is limited. So you start to notice like the bass is weaker, it's kind of not as well controlled. That's the main area you notice a difference. And when you go up to something like a player like this, yeah, the bass is going to sound better. You're going to have better bass control, you know, better dynamics in the music, as good as the kind of in-ear monitors can deliver. So that's the main step up. Is, again, this is designed for use with something like these in-ear monitors, which are going to have better sound quality, so they're going to work better together, and they cost around the same amount of money. Likewise, someone might want to use a pair of full-sized headphones such as these Mezed Lyrics with something like this, and it's not quite so optimized for full-sized headphone use. But I mean, these are kind of designed to be more portable, and they power out of pretty much everything, including these little dongles, actually. But again, you're going to get better sound quality with something that's got more dedicated audio ability. Now, for the enthusiast, and you're probably wondering, okay, so I already know all that stuff. Tell me, where does this thing sit in terms of other gear? Well, basically, really kind of oversimply, it is essentially like buying a good dongle DAC, but with a whole Android system built in. So I kind of noticed fairly similar performance to this Luxury and Precision W2131, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's a pretty blue one. And we're kind of talking, yeah, basically a full Android version of this, more or less. I mean, of course, you've got better DACs. There's fancy THX amplifier in there. But in terms of performance, it wasn't really that particularly specially greater than others. One of the nice things is that in terms of general overall sound quality of a portable ESS-based DAC amp system, it actually sounded pretty nice. It didn't have that kind of that edginess that ESS gear tends to have. There was a bit of an improvement over the good old, this was the kind of the real killer, you know, in that price range for a while, the R6 2020. And, you know, the sound quality versus, you know, you get the full Android. You had the first one, I think, was Android. The first one with Android 9. It had the first one, the Snapdragon 660 as well. But the M11 Plus does push things further. Like I had better instrument separation. I volume matched them. I had better instrument separation from the M11 Plus. Better overall sound quality. I think the volume didn't go quite as loud as it does in the Hobby, but kind of the overall sound quality, and I don't listen particularly loud, I might note, was better from the M11 Plus. So there's a step up generally there. It was just, you know, better refinement in the sound in general. It didn't. Some people I've seen people online call the M11 Plus a little bit warm sounding. I wouldn't call it that. I think it's just that it doesn't have some of the kind of harsh edginess of some of the older FiiO gear, like the older players that use the AKM 4490. And we're talking M11, for example. that used the 4490 and had a bit of the edgy sound that the 4490 tends to have. Now I still have a working, barely, M11 Plus, and that had that 4497, which is kind of the high-end, smooth-sounding DAC that the AKM made. So it was a high-end one rather than the edgy-sounding cheaper ones, and that had that nice smooth sound to it, which was really pleasant to listen to, basically, or listen with, I should say. Now the resolution of the M11 Plus goes further, but it doesn't have any particular kind of saber edginess that you'd expect. It still sounded pretty kind of generally smooth, but it's kind of reflective. It's not as good sounding, of course, as the big M17. I mean, the M17 just takes everything a much bigger step further because of the better amplification and better everything in general. But still, it was pretty nice with in-ear monitors. The only downside is stuff in this price range isn't going to be as good as the $1,000 plus players, which can actually do a reasonable job with full-sized headphones. When I did get the lyrics, and I tried just for entertainment value the Stealth, which is really hard to drive. The DCA Stealth is just crazy. That's when the sound started getting, when you turn the volume up getting towards 100, things started to get shouty, things started to get harsh and edgy because the amplification just couldn't handle it. And as much as THX touts that these things are low distortion, they aren't low distortion when you start hitting high volumes at all. They really start to run out of power. So there was still that issue in that you're just limited in terms of output power. With in-ear monitors, really fantastic. It was quite listenable and very good, and I started watching some YouTube videos on there and started drifting through NPR Tiny Desk for a while with the FH9s, which I'm also going to write up a review of. And it was definitely an improvement over the R6 2020, but still you're limited by the fact that it's really not much more power than a dongle DAC. I mean, the output power is only kind of, well under 500 milliwatts. And, 32 ohms, and you start getting, it gets lower as you get towards 16 ohms, so it even gets a little bit limited with some in-ear monitors. And I mean, the FH9s scale up to better, over $1,000 DAPs. Actually, they will scale up beyond something like the M11 Plus. So I reckon, and this was from the 4.4 millimeter output. So I reckon, if you are getting something to use as a very flexible digital transport, which it does fine. I've run it as a digital transport. If you're using it as the USB or the SPDIF, or you want something, with a variety of options, sometimes I might use this with Bluetooth headphones for trying them out, or, dedicated music player. As a dedicated music player on the analog side, it was a decent player for use with in-ear monitors. It's not gonna beat the $1,000 plus gear, say for example Cayenza N6 Mark II or M15 or that kind of thing. It's still a step down from those. But I mean, if you're someone who wants something like kind of good quality, I mean, this W2131 is actually pretty good quality, but in a full-size DAP, and you're going to primarily use it with in-ear monitors or use many of the other features, that's where this really works well. And it's kind of knocked off the kind of king in that, at least the one of the DAPs I've tried, and I haven't tried all the ones in this price range. My previous kind of king in that price range, which was the fully featured R6 2020 with better sound quality than this can deliver. And it's got Android 10 if you really care about that. So if it's a current really epitome of what's available in the kind of $500 to $1,000 price range, I mean, we're hitting a dead on between those two numbers, that is the FiiO M11 Plus. So they've kind of held their position as makers of a really solid player and that price range. The only kind of downside to it is, while they've got over one of the little niggles I had where sometimes you couldn't hit their buttons on the edge of the key, the graphic keyboard, one thing I've noticed is if you look at the screen here, if I tilt it, it fades out off center, and this is not the lighting, it actually does fade out quite a bit. It looks quite dull if you're off center. Not too bad that way. That's only one of the major criticisms, is sent straight on. It's nice and clear, but ignoring the light reflections, it gets really dull really fast when you tilt it. That's the only minor thing, really, although it kind of becomes a bit buggy because I'm looking at it angled on from where I'm sitting, and it looks a bit faded. But for its low power output, you do get something like 14 hours of battery life available, and it should charge fairly quickly because, the newer electronics that are in there will charge a lot faster. And generally in my testing and looking at battery numbers going, over so many hours of listening, it seems to be FiiO tends to be fairly spot on about their numbers. Though, of course, if you're watching videos on there, like YouTube videos, then it starts to get warm and the battery really starts to drop a lot faster. So you're not going to get 14 hours of video watching. It's going to be something like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 or something like that, just simply due to the screen being on. Though you can compensate for some of that by kind of knocking the brightness down. But I think, stuff like something you can stick in your car as well with the car mode, the kind of the flexibility of options that are available in there, make this a really good buy if you're kind of looking for something in that price range. If you're starting to get out into some, good in-ear monitors and you want a good portable player as well, I think these really do a great job. Though if you want, kind of more, serious power and much more serious sound quality, you're going to be jumping up into the $1,000 plus players. So if you've made it this far into the video, good on you. Now, has this video helped you make a decision? If it has, you'd like to leave me a little thanks. There's a thanks button below the video, or you can buy me a coffee or become a Patreon. And you can also, in exchange for the buy me a coffee or Patreon, you can actually access my private Discord and chat with me directly and get my advice about audio gear, and actually the advice of a bunch of really good people on there who actually are way more into portable audio gear, especially than I am. Also, but if you've already owned one of these things, did my impressions match yours? Leave your comments below, because it's good that not just my impressions of a product are available, but impressions of other owners as well. And as always, thanks for watching, and I look forward to chatting to you online.